Welcome back. The Biden administration is proposing a rule giving broad protections to transgender athletes in public schools. It would expand Title IX and forbid schools from putting in place policies that, quote, categorically ban transgender students from participating on sports teams consistent with their gender identity. It does, however, allow schools to limit participation of trans athletes for fairness and safety reasons. And here now to discuss, Sarah Parshall-Perry, a legal expert at the Heritage Foundation. Sarah, welcome. So this proposed rule by the Biden administration still faces a lengthy approval process. Where do you see it going?
Well, what I see it doing ultimately in the end is being a rule that is going to generate quite a bit of controversy. In fact, the language about refusing categorical bans on transgender athletic participation is really this administration's attempt at a sort of faux flexibility. They've said that there cannot be across the board bans, but they're actually giving schools, school districts, and local administrators the opportunity to sort of develop for themselves what the appropriate plans are. That is essentially the creation of a bureaucratic nightmare that only this administration could dream up. And I see this going ultimately in the end straight to court.
It has a lot of trans people upset too. They're not fans as well. So meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, a new House bill would strip Title IX funding from schools that allow trans women to compete in women's sports. Your take on that, Sarah, and if that's the right approach?
I do think it's the right approach. When we see an executive agency that refuses to enforce the law as written, as the Department of Education has clearly refused to do, there is a 50-year-old precedent here. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 is not being enforced to protect the girls and women in equal educational opportunity that it was designed to. And so we now have Representative Stubbe's Fairness in Women's Sports Act. I think it is well-founded, it is common sense, it is based on the paradigm of Title IX itself, and it is ultimately for many young women who are essentially now at the sort of crux between determining whether they're going to play sports or whether or not they're going to have to withdraw completely. I think it's the only option.
Yeah, the name of the bill is the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. Sarah, Republicans will vote, or excuse me, the House will vote on this measure next week. Is this just a vote for show, or could this bill actually go somewhere?
I do think at this point, based on what we know about the composition of the Senate, it is unlikely to pass the Senate. And even if it did, in some unlikely happenstance, it would most certainly be vetoed by President Biden, who has made very clear that one of his administration's core missions is pushing sort of the transgender agenda and including even individuals who are transgender in the highest levels of his executive cabinet. It is something I think that he feels very strongly about. And so while we're unlikely to see movement during this particular congressional session, I think it is ultimately a show of good faith and interest from those individuals of character and confidence who have determined that, listen, the laws should be enforced as written, and women and girls need protection in education.
You know, withstanding this legislation and this proposed rule, where does this issue go from here, Sarah? Can you kind of put your finger on the pulse?
Well, it's definitely going to be something that's controversial, but unfortunately, the more we see this narrative pressured, the more we see it pushed upon the American populace, the less popular we see it becoming. We see everyone from biologically male ballerinas now competing along females, to track athletes, to sports athletes, to individuals who are being given International Woman of Courage awards by the president. In every space where women have naturally been recognized as co-equal with men, not the same as, but co-equal with, they're finding themselves on the short end of the stick. It rewinds the clock 50 plus years and undoes all the progress of the women's liberation movement. And unfortunately, I think this battle is only going to heat up.
All right, Sarah Parshall-Perry with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for your time this evening, Sarah. It's good to see you.
Thank you.